Hi there. So here we have the Dunlop Sonic Core Evolution 120. This is the Nick Matthews signature racket, which is a bit lighter in the head than the Evolution 130, which is more even balanced. This has got great swing speed. It's also got relatively decent power. I wouldn't string it above 27 pounds probably. You want to keep the tension relatively low so that you can still generate some decent power on it. What's quite good with this racket, you can get good control on it because it's quite a dense string pattern in the middle, but it still allows for a bit of power, which you'll see at the end because you've got the a bit more spacing down towards the throat area. So actually I've got the same one that I've just done before, so you see how it spaces out at the bottom. So this is to allow a bit more movement on the main strings to generate more power from where it's a little bit closer in the middle. Short side I'm going to have on this side, on the left side of the racket. I normally go short side on the right, which some people think is a bit wrong, but it's just how I like to do it. There isn't really a wrong or right way, unless you're using most of the Dunlop brackets, which have got notches in them. So as with the racket I've just shown you, you can see here we've got some notches on the outside the frame. It's really important to get this racket around the right way so you don't have the strings going over instead of under or through the notches. So here you can see, you don't see the strings sticking out. If you get it wrong, you'll see the strings sticking out over there. So really study the racket before you start stringing it. It's surprising how many rackets I see coming to me which have been strung incorrectly with the strings sitting outside of the frame too much. So anyway, here we go. So I'm going to do 8 head lengths worth of string to measure on the short side, and the rest can be for the long side and for the crosses. As this racket is starting at the throat and it's 14 strings, it's going to finish at the head. So no need to do any fancy round the world techniques, but I will show just how I do the crosses here so we can maintain some good tension on the sides. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A little bit of a pause whilst I was doing that, just because I trod on a bit of the string so it wasn't pulling through. Quite a common occurrence with stringers treading on the string, but we try not to where possible. This particular frame, although this is an evolved version of the Evolution, that's hard to say, evolved version of the Evolution. This particular type of frame has been used by Nick Matthews for years now. It's his signature racket. It's a decent frame. It's got a very loyal following. I think those people who get on with this frame tend to stick with it. Some really good colorways on this racket as well. I quite like this one. It's a bit more reserved than previous years where we've had the kind of mix of brighter blues and limes and yellows and all sorts of colors. But it's a decent racket. I mean, Nick Matthews for a lot of people is a bit of an idol of a player. He's known for being an incredibly physical player on court, who's a superb volleyer, one of the best volleyers the game's probably seen. You know, you wouldn't want to get into a rally with Nick Matthews where you put too much which is off the walls, because anything in the centre of the court or within, you know, a foot or two of the walls, he just polishes it off from the centre. Absolute monster of a player from that side of it. Not many players could really live with Nick Matthews when he was really on it with his volleying. So this is why this racket probably suits Nick Matthews very well, because it's head light, lots of head speed that goes through it. So it's good for volleyers, doesn't tie your arm out too much. I always find that they're fairly stiff frames. So again, good for volleyers because get some decent control. But, you know, I think everybody likes different frames. We've all got our personal choices. I think at the moment, the top boys out there, so your Tecnifibres, Dunlops, Heads, they've got some really good rackets at the moment. Really, really good rackets right now. So if you're a squash player looking to buy a new racket, spoiled for choice really. I mean, you have the superb Tecnifibre X-top rackets with the slashes, and of course the best-selling carver flexors. Dunlop have got a superb range of rackets right now, as used by the likes of Ali Farag, Diego Elias. Then you've got some of the upcoming stars, Zakaria. You've got other players as well, such as Jonah Bryant as well. So it's interesting actually, because Zakaria and Jonah Bryant use the Dunlop Ultimate, which is a racket I've used before in the past actually, when I was playing, and that's got 14 main strings, 16 main strings on it, as opposed to the standard 14 which you get on the Elite, which gives super control, like ridiculously good control on that racket. But that is certainly a racket which you have to compensate for by stringing a lot lower. As ever, what I'm doing here is I'm just stringing 2 or 3 on each side, and then moving over to the next side. It's important to spread the tension out evenly on the racket, so that way you don't deform the racket. But yeah, I mean, I think this particular racket is obviously got a pretty big following for volleyers. As I've said before, Nick Matthew, biggest strength is determination and volleying. Those are 2 of the biggest things associated with him. Nick Matthew now really cutting his teeth in the world of coaching. I think he's out at the European Championships with Team England at the moment. So no doubt there's going to be lots of people that can learn some really good stuff off Nick Matthew. So what I'm doing here, so we normally wouldn't double pull, however, on this final cross, I quite like to do it this way, because it means that I can ensure that I've got really good, really even tension on this main and on this main as well. And it's actually quite a good way of protecting the top crosses, not to get quite so much tension going through the top. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 10% worth of tension onto these top ones. And I'm just going to knead them through, so I'm just going to work these crosses through. I always do this 4 times just to get that tension through. And what you're doing here is you're not putting too much pressure on the top, because that's when you can get premature breakages. So you're just being really careful up there. And as I said, it's a really good way of ensuring that the side mains stay consistent, because that's one of the biggest areas where people can lose some good playability with their racket, is on the side mains. Because if one side main's noticeably slacker than the other, it creeps. So you'll end up with a racket that's got significant tension loss in the main strings, which is absolutely what you don't want to happen, because something like 75–80% of all the characteristics of your racket will come from those main strings, certainly in terms of volleying and the power. So we can cut that string off there. It's nice and neat, and it also lines up with the tie-off point, because the majority of Dunlop rackets, if not all of them, have designated tie-off points for the crosses and for the mains, which, you know, is pretty useful. It's useful to have those, but for an experienced stringer, they could probably string on either side. However, as we've said before, this racket has got notches on around the frame, so you do actually have to start this racket in the right place, in the correct place at the top. If you don't, then you end up with strings that are exposed on the outside of the racket, which means that you're going to spend lots of your money getting your rackets restrung because they're breaking around the outside. So I can now release that clamp, so I've just clamped up there. Interesting to know what people's favourite Evolution racket is. I'm a big fan. I think it was might have been about 3 rackets ago where it was a slightly brighter blue with the lime on it. I used to quite like that one in terms of the colour, but I think this one's a bit more reserved. I like the colour of the grommets being blue. I think that's pretty cool. That's a bit different, sets it off a little bit. I think this racket would play good with most strings. I mean, I'm a Tecnifibre guy, so I like my Tecnifibre strings. X1 biphase being my favourite. I think this would go well actually with something like Ashaway Ultranic. So Ashaway Ultranic, around £24–25 in blue as well. So the blue version, slightly thinner version. Actually, I should say probably slightly wider version. There's actually a thinner version than the blue, which is in the black, which is 1.05, I think it is. And then you've also got the Power Nick as well. So the Power Nick, I think for somebody that is a power volleyer, the Power Nick would probably work pretty well on this racket. I'm not a huge fan of the Power Nick. It's not my favourite Ashaway string. I think Ultranic's probably my favourite Ashaway string. But if you're the kind of person that puts a lot of meat behind the ball when you're hitting your power volleys from the centre of the court, then Power Nick's going to work well because you're getting the most out of that racket. So just a little nudge to the casual stringer out there. One of the biggest things I see from people is not straightening the strings as they're stringing, as you'll see with what I'm doing now. So aside from just taking care with the string when I'm weaving it through, what you should always do is try to straighten the strings as you're pulling through. You're not going to really lose any time doing it that way because you're actually straightening them as the tension's still being pulled. But what that means is you get the true tension being pulled through, as opposed to straightening at the end where everything's all bowed. That means you're probably missing £2 or £3 worth of tension towards the end if you're waiting. I'll always re-straighten them, just tweak them a little bit at the end anyway, just to make sure that they're looking nice and neat. But if you ever see a stringer not keeping the strings straight whilst they're stringing, beware. And no doubt most of the people watching this video will be stringers, which is good. I don't know why you'd watch a video on stringing if you're not a stringer. Maybe you're a racket geek like me and you find this interesting, which is cool, and or you want to get into stringing. But yeah, one of my biggest tips is keep those strings straight. Best way to get consistency as well. If you want to really have a true barometer of your stringing prowess, get 2 or 3 rackets of exactly the same model, same string tension, same string setup, everything. String them back to back. Get 3 or 4 even better. But if you get 3 or 4 rackets exactly the same, try to go for exactly the same setup. If they're pinging the same after you've strung them, maybe wait a couple of hours until you start testing them out because you need the strings to settle a bit. Then you've done a good job. But it's one thing to be able to string a racket and get the right pattern. It's another thing to string a racket and get the exact same tension on every single racket. I use a number of different tools, as I've probably explained before. So I've got a Pro T1 chromatic tuner, which is an Italian company it's made a kind of device, which I'll show you now, which is here, which is pretty cool. So it's fully digital, and you connect it up, and you can basically check the resonance of the strings as you ping them. And then for tennis, I've got an ERT machine. Each one of these machines costs in excess of 250, 300 quid. So they're expensive pieces of kit. You can get manual ones as well, which aren't quite as accurate, but they're really useful to gauge your consistency. So yeah, one of my favourite things I think with Nick Matthew from watching him as a player was probably seeing his jewels, not as in the crown jewels, but jewels as in pistols at dawn jewels, with James Willstrop. I mean, Nick came out on top nearly all the time. I think he was definitely James Willstrop's bogeyman. James Willstrop, you know, just couldn't get over the line with Nick, but I think that's as much to do with Nick's ability and his mental toughness as it would be to do with James Willstrop's inability to beat him. I mean, James Willstrop's absolutely hands down one of my favourite players. Just incredible. I mean, his backhand drop is unreal. But yeah, just seeing Nick's never say die attitude playing against him, where, you know, you'd be able to push James to the point of complete exhaustion, such as in their British Open match one year, I think, where James cramped up in the back corner and literally couldn't move after that. You know, what a competitor. I think the two of them get on pretty well now. I think they certainly talk to each other a bit now, which is really good to see, because a lot was made up about their rivalry when they're in their playing careers, but it's good to see that they do a bit of work together now. So right at the end, come to the tie off. So again, this is another tie off mark on this racket. I mean, it is a bit of a strange racket to look at, this one, when you really study it carefully and you see how wide the gaps are at the bottom. I mean, it's crazy, really, you know. But as I said before, it's there for a reason. It's there to allow a bit more breathing space for these mains, so they're not too constricted, to allow a bit more power, because it is more constricted in the middle for that control. So there you go.